Hey everyone, I want to answer the question, why do good people suffer? Why is it so hard in this world to be a good person? And I think every one of us ask themselves this question at least once or reasonably multiple times in their lives. Because I hate that feeling. I hate that this world punishes your efforts if you speak up, if you talk about the truth. You look at whistleblowers or journalists, everyone who tries to do something good for the world, reveal crime and bring light on shady behaviors of humans, gets killed and persecuted. The best example for that is Jesus Christ. Everyone who tries to reveal the evil within humanity, the evil within the world, the crimes, the war, the destruction, is persecuted and hated. Hated by history, hated by the people in power, hated by establishments, hated by governments. Everyone who goes against the forces and powers which are in place, you will face severe consequences. If you talked about your concerns during, what happened 4 years ago with the medical treatment they forced onto people, you got isolated, you got shadow banned. If you talk about the bad things the Chinese government does to Uyghur people, you will get shadow banned in China. If you talk about the horrible things the Israeli military does in Gaza Strip, now it's getting better, but only slowly, you will get problems, you will get shadow banned. If you go to demonstrations against the measurements which were in place for for the global crisis we had a few years ago, you got persecuted. If you support a certain political candidate, you get persecuted. People start hating you. If you follow a certain party in your country, people start hating you. If you fight for freedom of speech, if you fight for what is close to your heart, the world will hate you. And I tell you, it is because the powers in place and the ones who rule the world are in themselves evil. And the world itself is full of greed because the earth, time, space, and resources are limited. So people become greedy. If they see there's only one bread left, people will fight for the last loaf of bread. But if there is an abundance, people will be in peace. And even if we have abundance, you see people still fight each other because we have a very certain dark, low aspect of ourselves. But we also have a very divine aspect. That's why people fight for freedom. That's why people fight for greater causes. You look at all the rebels, you look at all the historical figures like Lao Tzu or Kongzi or Buddha or Jesus. They all fought for a greater cause, and many of them had trouble with the authorities. Buddha with his father, Kongzi with the government, Lao Tzu with the government, Jesus with the government, with the political establishment. They all had problems because they tried to bring the greater cause down to earth. In a philosophical way, you look at Platon, you look at Pythagoras. He's a perfect example for that. He talked with the young people, tried to open their eyes, make them woke, try to wake them up to the horrible conditions they live in, and he got killed by the government. And look at Edward Snowden. If you reveal the war crimes of the US and of President Bush, who's still not in prison for what he did, and Barack Obama, who bombed whole Yemen to the ground, you will be an idiot. People make fun of you. But if you support a certain political candidate, which is not doing everything well, but he didn't start any new world war, he didn't start any war for oil like Donald Trump, you are hated. Even though we can still argue about the rest of what he does and says. If you support someone who's against the weapon lobby, who's against the resource lobby, you will get persecuted. If you're against the pharma lobby, you will get hated on. And I tell you, we can read something from the Bible. It is Psalms 34, verse 20. But the just one has to severely let's read something from the Bible, because it is a book full of wisdom and helps us to make it very clear why we have to suffer, and that it is seen by all philosophers and by all great people of the ancient times, prophets and gurus. It is a well-known question. Why do good people have to suffer? And David, probably we think it was David, and historically it is not very it is very probable that it was David who wrote this. It's a song, a psalm written by him. Let's read it together. Psalm 34, verse 20. The just one has to suffer under a lot of evil, but the Lord will save him from everything. So in this verse, we see there's a lot of evil we have to suffer because we are trying to fight for a greater cause. But something, a good power, tries to save you from that. And I can tell you, it only makes sense if you understand that the world in itself, the limitation of resources and the greed of humankind is an evil power, and that spirit of greed which controls our financial system, our resource-based system, attaches to everyone who wants to check into that system of power, who wants to have power for themselves too. And there's an opposing spiritual force from a not resource-based, not limited world, because we can argue about atheism and all kinds of religions, but I can tell you one thing we all know for sure, that we all live in this material world, and that we all perceive that this world is limited, our powers are limited, our resources are limited. But there's also that's what we don't perceive, or at least most of the people don't perceive, and which is very hard for science and measurements to discover, is that there is a spiritual world, a metaphysical world, and we know it scientifically, because you can close the video now because you feel like triggered because it's something spiritual, metaphorical. But no, science knows that the subatomic world does not operate on this limited foundation, how the reality works. Subatomic particles, they don't seem to care for time and space. So there's a world which is far beyond our perception and which does not care for physical reality and for the physical limitations we have. And probably there's an even greater world out there, and we know that for a fact, because 1% of our atoms are particles. 0.1% even are particles. Maybe even less, 0.01. And these particles are also energy which vibrate at a lower state, so we can perceive them as matter. So nothing actually is matter. Nothing actually is this material world. But we live in a state of consciousness where we are trapped in this material world. And we believe these traps of limitations. And we get into this state of greed where we fight for survival and we kill and destroy and hate each other. And everyone who wants to reveal that we are in this evil state of mind, prison in this world, is evil. But many people recognize them over time, over history, that those people are the ones who got it all, who had like the highest perception of reality, like all the Chinese philosophers, or like the ancient Indian philosophers, or ancient Greece. And the one who's the most prominent in the Western world is Jesus Christ. They all reveal that this physical material reality in itself is limited, and it all brings us to greed and suffering and to hate each other. And that's very hard to love each other and overcome this perception and reality. And we need to overcome that, because there's a good force because we think the world punishes us for being good, and that's right. But there's something we cannot perceive which is way higher, and probably is percentually the majority of the reality and existence is an immaterial, metaphysical world, and we don't see what's happening in there. And this world, at least part of it, most part of it, is supporting and loving life. Because I can tell you the subatomic world is the reason and possibility why this atomic world and life can come into existence. So most of the immaterial, metaphysical, spiritual world where probably God will live in, the angels would live in, your ancestors, spirits, souls would live in, is the key and main part of reality, but we just don't get it. We don't see it. But I can tell you, over time you see the ones who believed in the truth, the ones who fought for a greater cause, are the ones who are not forgotten by history and are upheld in a utmost high value. They're the great heroes of humankind, and humankind deeply is in long and search for doing good and trying to heal themselves, having a nice life, not to suffer anymore, free themselves from this suffering wheel of getting punished and then for having bad mood and punish someone else, but getting into a good, like breaking that devil's cycle and getting into a good cycle, an angel spiral where you smile at someone and he has a great day, and then that person smiles to another 10 people because he had a great day, and then you create this good positive loop. And it is worth it to fight for a greater cause, but you need to understand the world will always punish you for that. The world will hate you. The world will not support you in good and loving ways when you fight for peace and freedom, because the world in itself is based on limitation. And the spirit of this world, which is the authority of this world, if you have governments, if you have politics, organizations, NGOs, NATO, WHO, all these authorities on the World Bank, WEF, all these authorities on the world, they are based on this limited resource, and their brain is hardwired to that limited resource thinking, and that all humans are actually bad and lost, and they need this hard guidance, and that we don't have something supernatural which guides us, then we need a government. And this government, if they decide what's good and evil, and you ask yourself what is good and evil, or you ask a philosopher which is what is good or evil, or you ask the Bible what is good and evil, you probably come to very different conclusions. Because if you think from a spiritual, subatomic, metaphysical perspective, and from a material, earthly, limited resource perspective, you have two totally opposing worldviews and totally opposing. Therefore, from your mindset, from your perspective, come all possibilities of action. You will from your perspective of life, decide what is possible and what is not possible. Your perception of reality decides how you think reality works. And from how it works, you decide how you act. And we live in totally different worlds if you believe that CO2 will kill the world in the next 2 years, and I believe that the world is perfectly well done, and that when you ask a scientist 160 million years ago, CO2 was 3 times the amount of it is now, and the world was not burning. Insects were just like 2 meters big, and birds were reptilians. I don't know. We just know scientifically for a fact that we had 10 times CO2 on this world, 100 times, 200 times. We had 300 times the emissions of today, and a volcano can erupt what Europe produces in emissions in 1 day, which Europe produces in 1 year, all citizens. So if we live in this limited reality and we just function by it and we just blindly listen to it, or you live in this perfect reality where everything is aligned and you trust the process, you have way different decisions. And these decisions will separate you from the world, and the world will hate you. And that's what Jesus said when he said, they persecuted me. How they persecuted all the prophets which came before me, and how they will persecute you, because what he called himself the truth. And if he says they persecuted me, he wants to say they persecuted the truth. And if we follow the truth, if we follow Jesus, if we follow the truth, we will be persecuted, like the prophets, the gurus who came before him, who fought for the truth. Everyone who will fight for greater cause will be smashed by the system, because you will reveal their evil ways of greed and power and politics. And they will do it for a greater cause, and they will say it is for a great and big purpose, because everyone can construct their own religion and ways of morality, because everyone needs to justify their actions in their own mind for their own conscience. And if I say the world's overpopulated, all my actions for international medical downward approaches are justified. If I think oil is scarce and my people are the best people in the world and my country is the best country in the world, I will just conquer countries for oil, and I don't fucking care. Just to keep the price low, just to make my people happy, to keep them silent and not question my authority, not question my government. Because and you see, the whole world is created around comfort. They don't want you to question. They don't want you to fight for something good. They don't want you to be a good person. They just want you to be calm and domesticated. They want you to watch porn. They want you to eat bad. They want you to be unmotivated. They want you to come home, eat bad food, give a fuck on life, and just be silent and obedient. And if you are not, you are the problem. And that's a fucking joke. If you become a opposition, you will become right-wing, an extremist, a suppressor, a liar, a conspiracy theorist, a tinfoil head. They will get all kinds of names just to mark you for society as the evil one, because you question how society works. And this is what we have to understand. The world is punishing us for bad behavior, but God and a higher realms of existence which we cannot perceive in this atomic reality. Some people can because they trained themselves, but most people don't. Some people had this deep connection to that subatomical reality, this higher realms of being, like prophets, like gurus, like philosophers, like mystics. They had this connection, like the man in the Old Testament, they had this deep connection, and they were questioning reality, and they didn't even care for being secluded. They didn't even care for being isolated, for being ghosted, for being shadow banned. They didn't care. Because the only thing, when you come to this higher moral, through religion, through philosophy, through Jesus Christ, through contemplating, through getting into inner conflict with yourself, which of your behaviors are good and which are bad, what is good, what is sin, what is helping the world, how you are mistreating your relatives and loved ones. If you get into this inner conflict and try to reprogram yourself and see what reality is really about, that it is not about greed and that you survive, but that we are a survival, that we are collective, that we are all together in this boat. And if you get to that new place of higher moral and higher standards, you will see it's worth it to fight. It's worth it to get persecuted. And I don't know any guru, any philosopher, or any prophet, any rebel, any whistleblower who got as persecuted and hated as Jesus Christ. Nobody. No Che Guevara, no Edward Snowden, no Stalin, no rebel or innovator or bullshit talker who wants to portray themselves as a hero and visionist or philanthropist like Bill Gates. Nobody of these people got persecuted like Jesus Christ. And the world hates the truth. And the world hates the one who reveals the evil ways of our hearts. Because you hate nobody more than the one who reveals your lies. If you are a liar, and who points out that you are a thief if you are a thief, because you want to hide that shit. If you are a murderer, you don't want that it comes out. So everyone who points that shit out is the asshole for you. Everyone who is evil in their heart will not try to get into the truth, into the light. That's what Jesus said in John 8, I think. The ones who are not afraid of the light, who do not have anything to hide, they will step into the light and be guided by the light of the world. And that is the truth. That's why Jesus calls himself the truth, because I cannot have logically another explanation than the one who fought for the greatest cause, for protecting widows, for protecting orphans, weak ones, prostitutes, the worst of worst people, gamblers, addicts, the worst people in the world. This guy protected. The weakest people in the world. The ones who are persecuted the most, hated the most, who could not defend themselves. He defended. So nobody has a higher moralic standard than the one who also tries to protect the people who we would condemn as evil. Because in a world full of high moralic standard, you would also try to help everyone. And not only the nice people, you would try to re-socialize people. You would try to undo their wrongdoings and help them to wash themselves clean and be saved, be part of the collective again. You would reintegrate people. That's what we do in the Western world. You don't get how deep that moral of Jesus Christ is woven into our reality. Why don't we kill prisoners? Because we deeply believe into that re-socialization of people, that people can be redeemed, that people can be salvated, that people can be restored in their love and their humanity. Nobody does it like him. Our whole moral construct is based on him. And he was persecuted the most. He's an idol to people like Edward Snowden. He's an idol to people like me. He's an idol to people who fight for a greater good, who fight for freedom. And that's what we have to sink in. And when he got persecuted, we probably will get persecuted too. And that's what he even said. That's a quote from him. And I tell you, that is also a promise, because he says the ones who are hungry for justice, they will see justice. The ones who are soft and calm in their heart and in their soul, they will inherit the earth. He wants to promise us that a higher spiritual world we cannot perceive will bless us abundantly, heavily, strongly, immensely for all the good we did on earth. When we protected the weaker ones, he says the weakest, if you give home and shelter to the weakest, you gave shelter to me, because he was the weakest. He was the one who got punished the most. We have to understand, and all our moralic standard, having laws even for animals. You know that the first religious concept of protecting animals comes from the Old Testament, from the Mosaic laws Jesus followed, all Jewish people follow. Protecting donkeys and animals which work for humans, that they also have Shabbat, a free day off. All our moralic concepts for loving animals, dogs and cats and cows, and protecting children, hating on pedophilia, all that comes from this high moralic standard we inherited from Judeo-Christian culture. And we have to protect that. And we have to know that this is worth to fight for, and that we get blessed from heaven and hated from the world. And now you know and understand why the world punishes the people who do good and why they die young. And that for you, like Paul said, it is an honor to follow in his footsteps, the greatest rebel and the greatest moral idol we have on this world, Jesus Christ. It is a blessing to us, and we do not care for how the world hates us. Amen. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord.